Marry him, Odessa. Not a request, more like the bark of a dog. Her brother spat, the words landing like gravel. She tasted blood, knew better than to argue. A quick glance at the preacher, eyes averted. God knew what debts drove this charade. But here's the thing they didn't see. Underneath the dirt and the forced obedience, a spirit simmered. Nolan Nash, the cattleman, he'd soon find out Odessa wasn't some broken thing to be bartered. She carried a quiet fire, a wellspring of compassion ready to be unleashed. Compassion for those weaker than herself. They think they're buying a wife. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. He stood beside her, tall and sun-worn, with a dark brown hat held in his callous hands. His name was Nayland Nash, a cattleman from the southern edges of the Bitterroot Valley. They had spoken only twice before this day, once when her brother arranged the marriage, and once when she asked him not to do it. He said nothing then, just looked at her with those deep-set, watchful eyes and nodded once, like he understood something she didn't say out loud. Now his voice came low, a whisper meant only for her, so close her shoulder brushed his arm. "I'll make you smile someday." The words hit her like warmth in the cold, unexpected and quiet. She looked up at him, eyes red and rimmed with disbelief. He was not handsome in the polished way of city men. No, he had angles and sunburn and lines that hinted at hard winters and harder choices. But his eyes were steady, kind. She managed a breath. The preacher's words kept going. Her brother Udia stood off to the side, arms crossed and jaw set. He had debts. Nolan had land and cattle. It was not a love match. It was survival. Odessa had no say in it. But Nolan had not touched her, had not demanded anything, just stood there still as a mountain and whispered a promise. They rode away in silence. Odessa wrapped in a wool shawl, Naleen guiding the wagon with one hand and holding the reins loose. The wedding ring felt heavy. She stared at it, then at the land stretching wide and uncertain in every direction. "You hungry?" he asked. After a while, she shook her head. He nodded once and said, "No more." By sundown, they reached his homestead, a small cabin tucked beneath the rise of a hill, with a lean-to for horses and smoke still curling from the chimney. A woman stepped outside, older, sturdy, with gray in her hair and a rifle slung across her shoulder. "This her?" she asked. Nolan climbed down. "Odessa, this is me. She helped raise me after my folks passed." Me looked Odessa over. Not unkind, just direct. "We got stew. Come inside." Inside smelled like pine and rabbit and firewood. Odessa sat stiff in a corner while Nolan hung up his coat and me ladled stew into bowls. "Eat," me said. "You look like wind could carry you off." Odessa ate because it gave her something to do. Nolan stayed quiet, eating slow, watching her without making it obvious. When she stood to take her bowl to the basin, her hands shook. Me reached out and steadied them. "You did not choose this," me said quietly. "But Nolan's a good man. He will not hurt you." Odessa nodded, throat tight. That night, Nolan lit a lamp in the front room and pointed to the bed. "I'll sleep out here." She nodded again, grateful and ashamed all at once. He paused, then added, "You're safe here." The days passed slow. Odessa swept the cabin, fetched water, mended linens. Nolan worked the cattle, repaired fence, rode out in the early light, and came home with dust in his hair. He never touched her, never asked why she cried at night when she thought he was asleep. But he noticed. He started leaving small things on the table. Wildflowers in a jar, a tin of sweet tobacco for me, a folded note that said, "Wagon needs fixing, but I will take you into town soon." She never answered, but something softened in her, piece by piece. Then one morning, me shook her awake. "Come quick." Out by the fence, Nolan was kneeling beside a girl, a little thing, maybe 6 or 7, with tangled hair and torn shoes. A boy stood behind her, older by a few years, arms protectively around her shoulders. "Found them by the creek," Nolan said. "No adults." Odessa knelt. "What are your names?" "Clara," the girl whispered. "And that's my brother Calb." Me and Odessa washed them up, fed them, soothed their shaking. Later, as the sun dipped low, the children sat curled beneath a quilt, while Odessa stood on the porch, arms folded. "Where are their parents?" she asked. Nalin stared out at the darkening hills. "Found a wagon turned over downstream, empty. No tracks but theirs. They were abandoned." He nodded. "Looks like it." Otis's hands clenched. She remembered the ache of being left behind after her mother died, after her father drank himself to ruin, after her brother sold her name for a stack of cattle receipts. She turned to Nalin. "They can stay, right?" He looked at her then, really looked, and nodded. "Of course." Weeks passed. Odessa started brushing Clara's hair each morning, humming old lullabies. Calb followed Nalin around like a shadow, eager to help to learn. Nalin taught him how to mend a saddle, how to check the fence line. Otisa caught Nalin smiling once, just a flicker, when Calb got a rope toss right. One evening after supper, Clara crawled into Otis's lap without asking. Odessa froze, then wrapped her arms around her. "You smell like cinnamon," Clara mumbled, already half asleep. Odessa looked up and found Nalin watching her from the hearth, something quiet and full in his eyes. He did not look away. Neither did she. The first snow fell soft and slow. Odessa stood at the window, watching the flakes drift like feathers. Nan came up behind her, not too close, but closer than usual. "You still sad?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded. "Sometimes." He hesitated, then said, "I meant what I said. I will make you smile someday." She turned to face him. "You already did." And just like that, the air between them shifted. He reached out slow and touched her hand. No rush, no demand, just a touch warm, steady. Odessa did not pull away. Not this time. The ice came early that year, crawling over the edges of the creek like it meant to stay. Odessa wrapped Clara in an extra shawl before they headed out to the hen house, the child's small hand tucked in hers. The morning was quiet, save for the wooden groan of trees settling under frost. Odessa moved carefully, mindful of the slick earth, her breath rising in clouds. Inside, the hens stirred as she gathered eggs into a basket Calb had carved with Nalin's help. Clara counted each one under her breath, her numbers steady, her eyes alert. Odessa watched her a moment, then reached out and brushed a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. "You're steadier than most grown folk," she said. Clara didn't answer, but her smile was soft, and when they stepped outside again, she didn't let go of Otis's hand until they reached the porch. Inside, the fire crackled low. Mee was seated at the table, a length of wool across her lap and a needle glinting in her fingers. Odessa noticed Nalin's coat draped across the chair, the tear at its shoulder newly stitched. "You've got a good hand with mending," Odessa said, setting the eggs down. Mee didn't look up. "Keeps me from thinking too much." "Not all thoughts are worth the space they take." Odessa nodded and poured water into the kettle. By the time the sun had climbed past the ridge, Nalin returned with a brace of hares slung over his saddle. His horse's breath steamed in the cold as he dismounted. Odessa opened the door for him without a word. He stamped snow from his boots and carried the hares to the back room without needing to ask where to put them. Later, when the children were playing with carved animals by the fire, Odessa stood at the window with her arms folded, watching the sky darken. Nalin joined her after hanging his coat. She didn't turn toward him, but she didn't move away either. "There's a traveling doctor headed up from Bozeman," he said. "Me heard from a trapper should be here in a few weeks." "Is someone sick?" she asked. "No, but it wouldn't hurt to have a look at Clarara's cough, and Calb's arm still stiffens when the cold hits." She nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "You think they'll stay when spring comes?" He was quiet a moment. "Then I hope they will, but I won't hold them if they don't want to." She turned to him then, searching his face. "You'd let them go if it meant they'd be happier elsewhere." Odessa looked down at her hands. "That kind of letting go, it's not weakness, is it?" "No," he said, "it's the hardest kind of strength." That night, after the children were settled and Mee had gone to bed, Odessa lingered by the hearth. Nalin sat across from her, a book open in his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in some time. "I used to sing," she said, voice low. "Back when my mother was alive, she'd hum while she worked, and I'd follow her tune." He looked up. "Why'd you stop?" "I didn't have the heart for it after she passed." She hesitated, then added, I don't remember the sound of her voice anymore, just the shape of it like a room I used to know. He closed the book. You could sing again. No one would stop you here. Odessa didn't answer. The fire popped softly. Then she hummed so faintly it was more breath than tune. Nolan didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. The next day brought winds strong enough to rattle the shutters. Kalb stayed close to Nolan, helping him sort the dry goods they'd brought from town the week before. Odessa and me worked over a pot of stew while Clara sat at the table with a strip of cloth and a darning needle, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Me glanced toward the window. Storms rolling in. Odessa nodded. We'll ride it out. That night, snow piled up against the door. Nolan checked the roof beams, then made up the fire again. He passed Odessa a cup of tea, their hands brushing. She didn't pull away. Thank you, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, You still cry sometimes. I hear you. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. I don't want to make it worse by speaking on it, he added, but if you ever wanted to talk, I'd listen. She nodded once. I know. And then after a pause, You're not what I expected. Is that good or bad? She smiled, a real one this time. I haven't decided yet. He chuckled low in his throat. Fair enough. When she rose to check on the children, he stood too, but didn't follow. She paused at the doorway, looking back. I remember a little more of her voice now. He didn't ask who. She didn't have to say. Outside the wind howled, but inside the warmth held steady. The doctor arrived in a storm, his wagon wheels half buried in slush by the time Nolan and Kalb helped him to the porch. He was a compact man with a weathered satchel and a cough he waved off as just a bit of travel in the lungs. Odessa offered him tea and a dry towel, and by dusk he had examined both children by firelight, his spectacles fogged at the edges. They're strong, he said afterward, setting his cup down with care. The girl's lungs are still healing, but the cough will pass. Boy's arm won't fully straighten, but he'll keep his strength. Me nodded. That's enough. The doctor slept in the loft that night and rode off the next morning with bread in his coat and a blanket over his knees. Clara watched him go with her chin tucked into Otis's side, fingers curled tight in the wool of her skirt. Later that day, while Kalb and Nolan fitted a new gate to the west pasture, Odessa found herself alone in the work shed, sorting through a crate of old tools. She came across a small wooden box tucked behind a cracked yoke. Inside were letters, roughaged and faded with time, addressed in a woman's hand. She didn't read them. Instead, she carried the box to the porch and set it quietly beside Nolan's chair. He brushed sawdust from his sleeves and looked up. Where'd you find it? Behind the yoke. I didn't open any. He ran his thumb along the edge of the lid. My mother wrote those. She used to leave them for me to read aloud when I was too young to understand. Odessa sat slowly beside him. Do you remember her bits? Her laugh mostly. The way she held her coffee mug with both hands. She watched him a moment. I remember my father's boots, the sound they made when he came up the stairs. That and the smell of pipe tobacco. He didn't speak, just listened. She used to sing about the river, Odessa added after a pause. My mother. I thought it was just a song, but I found the place she meant. Just past the ridge, there's a bend where the water slows. You go there often when I need quiet. He nodded, thoughtful. Next time I'll ride with you. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no. The following week brought a break in the cold. The snow crusted thin, and the sun, though pale, held longer in the sky. Odessa took Clara out with her to gather kindling, while me set to boiling soap in the yard. Kalb followed Nolan to check the far fence, the boys' strides longer than they had been weeks before. That evening, Odessa found herself in the kitchen with Nolan after supper. Me had gone to bed early with a headache, and the children had fallen asleep near the hearth, curled under the quilt Odessa had patched from old shirts. You ever think of leaving? She asked, drying her hands on a cloth. I did, Nolan said. Years back. Thought maybe I'd head south, see the desert lands. But something always held me here. She leaned against the counter. Obligation. No, just didn't want to go without someone to come back to. He looked at her then, and there was no weight to it, just truth. Quiet and plain, Odessa swallowed. I used to dream of cities, places where no one knew my name, where I could walk a market street and not carry anyone's burden but my own. Still want that? She shook her head. Not anymore. I just want a place where the days are steady and no one raises their voice. He stepped forward slow. You have that here. She reached out without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of his shirt sleeve. I know. His hand found hers warm and firm, and for a while they stood that way, the only sound the faint shift of logs in the fire. The next morning, Odessa rose early and saddled the mule herself. She packed a small satchel with bread and dried apple, then stepped into the bedroom where Nalin was just pulling on his boots. I'm going to the river, Ben, she said. Thought maybe you'd come. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just picked up his coat and followed her out into the light. The river bend lay quiet beneath low winter sun, its surface edged with thin ice that hummed when the wind passed over it. Odessa sat on a flat stone near the water, her boots planted firm in the cold soil, skirts tucked beneath her knees. Nalin stood a few paces behind, reins looped over a branch, watching the way her shoulders rose and fell with each breath. You come here when you need quiet, he said. She nodded, eyes on the current. It's the only place that ever felt like mine. He stepped closer, but not too close, and sat beside her, glancing once at the slow-moving creek. My father used to say, water remembers things long after people forget. Odessa looked at him, brows drawn. What does that mean? Not sure, he admitted, but I always thought maybe it meant grief runs deep and joy floats on top, and both are true at once. She didn't answer right away. Then I used to believe sorrow was a thing you had to hold, that letting it go meant you didn't love what you lost. Nalin kept his gaze steady on the river, and now she turned her face to the sun. Now I think maybe sorrow just wants to be seen, not kept. A crow called from the pine behind them. Nalin reached into his coat and pulled out a length of twine and a small carving knife. He began to strip the bark from a willow branch, the motion slow, careful. What are you making? She asked. Fishing line holder. Calb's been asking to learn. Odessa watched the knife work. He's grown more in the last few months than I thought possible. He watches everything. Learns fast. She smiled faintly, like someone else I know. He didn't look up. You mean me? Odessa laughed and the sound startled her. It came up from her chest unforced. Nalin stopped carving and met her eyes. That's twice now, he said. What? You've smiled, maybe even meant it. Don't get ahead of yourself, she said. Though the warmth in her face stayed, they stayed there until the light shifted gold. On the way back, Clara ran down the path to meet them, her braid bouncing against her back, cheeks pink with cold. There's a letter, she said breathlessly, from the post writer. Me said it's for you. Odessa frowned. For me, she took the envelope, the paper stiff, her name written in a hand she half recognized. She stepped inside while Nalin helped Clara feed the goats. Me stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled of cider and cloves. It's from my brother, Odessa said, voice low. Me didn't turn. You don't owe him anything. Odessa opened the letter with a steady hand. The words inside were short, the sentences pressed hard into the paper. Ueda was headed east, said he'd sold what little he had left. He wanted to know if she might return home, help him start over. She folded the letter and set it on the mantel. I'm not going back, she said. Me nodded. Didn't think you would. That night, Odessa stood in the doorway while Nalin pulled off his boots. The children were already asleep, and the house had settled into that soft silence that only came when nothing needed tending. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. He straightened slowly. Like what if Calb and Clara stay? If they grow here? If they call this home? He stepped toward her. I think about it every morning and every night. She reached for his hand. Then maybe we ought to make it a good place. Not just for them, for us. Nalin held her gaze, his fingers closing around hers. You sure? She nodded. I don't cry when I wake anymore. That's how I know. He bent his head, kissed her forehead with a gentleness that said more than any vow. Her breath caught not from sorrow, but from something rising in its place. Something solid, steady. When they turned in for the night, she didn't take the quilt to the front room. She stayed, curling beside him beneath the worn wool blanket, his arm warm across her back. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside the house held quiet, a home beginning. March came with a sudden thaw. The ground softened underfoot, and the first green shoots pressed through old snow along the base of the cabin's north wall. Otisa stood barefoot on the porch one morning, her hem damp with meltwater, listening to the steady creak of a wagon axle approaching from the west trail. Nayland stepped out behind her, shrugging into his coat. "It's the Tanner boys. They help run the sawmill east of here." The wagon pulled up. Two men perched on the seat, both covered in wood dust and wrapped in oilskin. The older one tipped his hat. "We're building a new barn up by Alder Creek," he said. "Could use an extra team and a steady hand. Thought you might be interested." Nalin glanced at Odessa. "We've got mouths here. You'd be home by sundown," the younger man added, "just for a week or two." Odessa didn't hesitate. "Take the offer." He looked at her uncertain. "You've given more than your share to this place," she said. "Let it give something back." After they left, Odessa turned to Calb and Clara, who were watching from the window. "We'll keep things running here. Me can show you how to check the traps." Me muttered something about boys and splinters, but she was already gathering her coat. The next several days passed without trouble. Odessa taught Clara how to turn the soil along the south field, showing her where the frost still held and where it had let go. At night, Calb read aloud by lamplight, his voice growing steadier with every page. Me took over the smokehouse and Otisa cooked more than usual, filling the cabin with the scent of pepper and meat stock. By the sixth day, the rhythm of things had settled into something close to ease. That afternoon, Odessa rode out to the ridge with Clara riding behind her. The girl had asked to see the wild plum trees blooming in the hollow, and Odessa remembered the way her mother once pointed them out, the first thing brave enough to bloom. They returned at dusk to find Nalin's horse tied to the porch rail. Inside, he was seated at the table, a folded paper in his hand, his coat still damp from the ride. Odessa paused in the doorway. "You're early." "They finished ahead of schedule," he said, rising. "I wanted to get back before dark." He looked older somehow, wearier around the eyes, but his smile was quiet and sure. She stepped to him, hands still dusty from the ride. "Did it help being out there?" "It reminded me what I want to come home to." He held out the paper. "They offered me a share in the lumber partnership. Said I could take on the West Quarter if I put up a stake in the spring." She took the page slowly. "Would that mean leaving the cattle behind?" "It would mean less riding out alone, more time here." He didn't add more than that. Didn't have to. She folded the paper and set it on the mantel. "Then we'll find a way." That night, Nalin carried a pot of hot water into the bedroom, while Odessa laid out the new linens Me had stitched. The children were already asleep and the wind had turned mild, lifting the curtains beside the window. He handed her a warm cloth. "You've got soil on your cheek." She took it but didn't use it right away. "You ever think about making something new here? Not just patching what was?" He moved closer. Every day she reached up, cupping the side of his face. "Then let's stop calling it survival. Let's build something worth passing down." He kissed her, then not tentative, not rushed, just steady like everything he'd ever done. She leaned into it, her fingers still rough from work, his breath warm against her skin, the room soft with lamplight and quiet. By spring, they had cleared the north field. Caleb and Nalin built a chicken run, while Me taught Clara how to dye wool using onion skins and lichen. Odessa planted squash and beans in long, careful rows, her fingers deep in the earth. One Sunday morning, Nalin brought out a small cedar box. Inside was a silver ring carved with a pine bow etched along the band. "I didn't ask before," he said, "but I'm asking now if you want to wear it." She took it with both hands and slipped it on without a word. Her eyes were bright, but no tears came. That summer, they built an addition to the cabin, 2 more rooms and a cellar. Calb painted the door red, and Clara hung strings of dried orange peel from the rafters to keep the spiders out, she said. Me passed that winter, her hands folded and a quilt pulled up to her chin. She went quietly with Odessa reading aloud beside her, and Nalin standing at the door. They buried her beneath the cottonwood just east of the garden, and Clara planted lupine around the stone. Years passed, not fast but full. Nolan took the lumber stake and worked half days, coming home with sawdust in his hair and stories in his coat pockets. Odessa started a small school for the neighbors' children, teaching letters and song in the front room. Calb grew tall, steady-handed, and even-voiced and took over the cattle for himself. Clara stitched her first dress at 12 and refused to wear anything else afterward. One evening, long after the first frost, Nellen sat beside Odessa on the porch, 2 mugs of Corey between them. "You remember when I said I'd make you smile?" he asked. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I remember everything. The stars blinked out over the ridge and the wind moved through the grass like it had nowhere else to be. They stayed like that until the fire inside burned low, until the night folded in close and warm, full of everything they had made together. A life of quiet days and long-earned love, a home that held.